The beta versions of Minecraft were the game's golden age, or that is at least what many on YouTube will have argued within the past year or two. Now, I have made it clear in previous videos that I do disagree with this sentiment, although I haven't elaborated on why too much. And I've been thinking about this topic for the past few weeks and have realized I actually have a lot to say about it. I do still hold this opinion and will spend a large portion of this video explaining why. However, when reflecting on the way I worded my opinion on this so-called golden age, I realized that I probably left out a large amount of nuance I believe is present here. You might have thought that even though I do hold a lot of nostalgia towards that version, I don't believe that there is a substantial, non-emotional reason to play them when compared to modern Minecraft. But that's not true, and I'll explain why in this video as well. Let's begin by discussing why I do not believe beta to be the golden age of Minecraft. In preparation for this video, I collected a decent amount of sample footage of the game. About an hour in modern Minecraft and about an hour and a half in beta 1.7.3. And the biggest thing that stuck out to me in that hour and a half is that I basically did everything that beta 1.7.3 had to offer. In other words, being an earlier version of the game, beta 1.7.3 obviously provides the player with less to do than modern versions of the game. And after you are done with everything that beta has to offer, all you have to do for the majority of players is just to build whatever you like. Now, this isn't actually the central criticism of my argument. Minecraft is intended to be a sandbox game where you can create whatever you like, so to argue that this version of the game is inferior because it gets you to the part where you can do whatever you like quicker would not only be a bit silly, but also a fundamental misunderstanding of what Minecraft is trying to achieve. So I'm not trying to argue that a beta is worse because it has less stuff. To illustrate what my actual criticism is, I'll ask you, the viewer, a question that might come off as a bit odd. In beta versions of Minecraft, how would the game allow you to enjoy doing whatever you wanted? And I want you to apply this question to specific parts of the game. I think in beta 1.7.3, the best example of this would be the Nether. You tell anyone playing the game for the first time that there's a whole other dimension for them to explore, they're going to get wide-eyed in excitement. However, if they ask what there is to actually do in this new dimension, I don't really think my response to that question would capture their imagination. Really, all I'd tell them about it is the different building materials they could find there. There's a red rock called netherrack, which infinitely burns, and then there's something called glowstone, which is the best light source in the game. That's pretty much it, except for like soul sand, but who cares? And what do these extra building materials allow you to do? Well, with netherrack you can build a fireplace, which is kind of cool, but it's a limited use case. And glowstone does look nice for things like street lamps, but torches stop mobs spawning too, so this doesn't actually change the way anyone is playing the game, except for giving the player a slightly greater amount of aesthetic choices when building. But even that I don't think is the worst of it. I think the worst part of the Nether is that neither glowstone or netherrack are hard to find. You will be surrounded by netherrack the moment you enter the Nether, and you will likely have a fair bit of glowstone in your vision as well. So I guess maybe someone's first adventure into the Nether would be to have a look around and explore it for the first time, and they might even enjoy that, but after that, they're just going in to gather resources. And they're not even hard to find. They're probably just going to be around their spawn anyway. In other words, beta Minecraft does not incentivize the player to explore the Nether at all. I think this problem with beta 1.7.3 is most obvious with the Nether, but it kind of extends to most aspects of the game. Prior to the Caves and Cliffs update, a common complaint about mining was that your 5th trip underground was unlikely to be any different to your 2nd, 3rd or 4th. The most effective way to gather resources was just to strip mine at low levels. Maybe you would find a cave, which might reward you with more resources, challenge you to fight some monsters, and hey, maybe you'll even find a monster room. But if you've done that all once, what's the fun in doing it again? Sure, it might be rewarding because of what you'll create with the resources you acquire with it, but wouldn't it be better if the act of acquiring those resources was also fun? I would even argue that this pattern of the game not rewarding the player for exploring it more even persists when exploring the above ground. Admittedly, there is likely to be some pretty cool world generation in these versions, and to some extent those are a reward on their own, but you do run out of biomes to explore pretty quickly, and there's only so many of the same kind of cool looking beta mountains that I can look at before I stop going, oh damn, that looks pretty cool. And of course, if I explore the overworld, what am I going to be rewarded with apart from cool world generation? And in beta, the answer is unfortunately nothing. Now, let's compare this with modern versions of the game. Let's say I'm building a modern looking house in Minecraft and I need stone, wood, and quartz to build it. When I am acquiring this wood, I might encounter a ruined portal or a shipwreck, which gives me resources which I wouldn't have found elsewhere. And in the case of the shipwreck, it would open up entirely new features of the game to explore in the form of a treasure map. When I am acquiring stone, I might encounter a trial chamber, or if I'm really lucky, a stronghold. When I am acquiring quartz in the nether, I might encounter a bastion or a nether fortress. When I explore in modern versions, even just in the context of doing menial things like gathering materials, I am rewarded with that by cool, unexpected things happening. I might not just be rewarded by new and exciting materials, but I might even be granted access to features of the game which I hadn't encountered thus far. To summarize this section, I think the main reason why modern Minecraft is superior to beta 1.7.3 is because it makes doing whatever you like much funner. If I want to build a mega base, for example, I can do that in both versions, but modern Minecraft is going to make that process far more unpredictable and therefore more enjoyable. It's not just that modern Minecraft has more to do than beta, it's that modern Minecraft delivers its content to the player in a way which makes engaging with the game's sandbox environments, that being the entire point of the game, much more rewarding. I think an understandable response to what I am saying is that, well, of course beta has less in it than modern Minecraft. It's much older, and also not a complete version of the game. To argue this like I am is to not give the game nearly enough credit. But to be clear, I am not saying that beta is bad for these reasons. It was a really incredible experience for the time in which it was made. It's just not the best version of the game ever, and therefore it cannot be the so-called golden age of Minecraft. That was admittedly a relatively harsh assessment of beta when compared to modern Minecraft, and from that you might expect me to say the following. The only reason to like beta over modern Minecraft is simply nostalgia. But actually, I don't think that's true. At least not quite. It's worth noting that everything I just mentioned is not really what the majority of videos I've seen on the topic of Minecraft's golden age have really focused on. They don't make an argument based on the main game loop as I have. They make aesthetic arguments. In other words, they argue that beta Minecraft simply looks better than modern Minecraft. And I'm not sure I agree with this, but I do get where they're coming from. I'll start with the, in my opinion, least compelling argument of the main ones that I've heard, and that is that beta's lesser range of building materials allows for a more minimalistic building style, which they argue looks better. Look, this is an aesthetic preference, and therefore not really something I can disprove. And also, I do get it. There is a very unique and compelling aesthetic to the way that builds in beta tended to look. I don't think liking this look is purely nostalgia, and that aesthetic is something that's not really possible in modern Minecraft. That said, I do think that without nostalgia, its appeal does lessen considerably. If you showed someone who didn't play the game in its beta days a picture of a well-regarded build in beta, and then compared it to a well-regarded build in modern Minecraft of a similar scale, I could almost guarantee that they'll prefer the modern version. Of course, this doesn't prove anything, and aesthetic preference isn't right or wrong, no matter how popular it is. That's not how preferences work. But I do think that it's evidence that this particular aesthetic preference is in large part a result of nostalgia. People will also argue that the world generation is better than in modern versions, and to be honest, I don't have much of a response to this, except that it's also just an aesthetic preference. I'm not sure it's caused by nostalgia though. Beta does genuinely look very different, if maybe a bit less varied than modern versions, but I'll get into my opinions on world generation later on in the video. And people will argue that the lighting in beta is better, and actually this is the aesthetic preference I share. There was a moment where I was exiting my mine in the most recent playthrough of beta that I did, and I came out to see that it had become nighttime. My house was sitting on a small hill, and it was illuminated in a very unique way that you don't often see within games. And it was just so dark, but the things I could make out, they looked so unique. I can't think of a better way to describe what I saw other than it was just a vibe, and one that would be removed when they changed the lighting in beta 1.8, which is known as the end of the Golden Age. So, all of these aesthetic differences do add up into two versions of the game which look undeniably different from one another. And while I think some preferences are more rooted in nostalgia than others, if you prefer the way that beta 1.7.3 looks when compared to modern Minecraft, more power to you. I could never take that away from you, and why would I even want to? But there is one criticism of modern Minecraft when compared to beta that I think makes much more sense. It doesn't have anything to do with aesthetics. It actually has a fair bit more to do with what I was saying earlier about Minecraft's game loop being primarily based around allowing the player to do whatever they like. And that is, in a sandbox gaming environment where your goal as a developer is to give the player the tools to have fun while doing whatever they like, as opposed to telling them what to do, why would you ever give the player a definite end of the game, and therefore a defined structured goal to work towards that they didn't decide upon themselves? This argument, in my opinion, is by far the best of the bunch, and to me it's pretty much undeniable. Adding something literally titled The End to a game meant to be played infinitely comes off as just not understanding why Minecraft works as a game in the first place. So this is something that, in my view, beta 1.7.3 undeniably has over modern versions of the game. Now, to be clear, I think I might be making this out to be worse than it is. You can always just, ignore the end in the Ender Dragon if you like. I often do. There's nothing making you do this. But still, they called it the end, and there's an end credit scene, so it really just doesn't feel right to me. The other thing that makes me feel better about this though is that I think this problem has become less pronounced as the game has been updated. When the end was added, there was not actually that much content to be found after beating the Ender Dragon, so it truly was a kind of ending for the game. Now there's much more stuff to do and explore. Some stuff is actually locked behind beating the Ender Dragon, and additionally, just with everything else in the game, it's now quite unlikely that you'll have done everything the game has to offer when you officially beat the game. So even though it's called the end and presented as an ending, I don't think it really is an ending for the vast majority of players. Nonetheless, this design decision still irks at me, and I think did make the experience of playing Minecraft feel much more linear for a good while after the release version of the game came out. And that actually leads me to the final point I want to make in this video. Look, In my eyes, the so-called golden age of Minecraft does have qualities that the modern versions of the game do not. I do not think they add up to making that era of the game better than modern Minecraft, but I at least see the kinds of reasons why someone might prefer beta, even though I think there's likely to be a lot of nostalgia involved in that preference. However, I cannot say the same for the so-called Silver Age of Minecraft. The Silver Age of Minecraft is usually defined as spanning from beta 1.8 to release 1.8. And yeah, look, I don't know why anyone prefers these versions outside of nostalgia. By the time that the game was released, we lost the aesthetic of the Golden Age and became a definite end in a supposed sandbox game. On top of the fact that early on, a lot of the new features of the game that were added in these versions, like hunger and sprinting, didn't work very well for a while. I would argue that this made the 1.0 release version of the game an actual downgrade from beta 1.7.3, despite all the new things that it added. A lot of these issues would gradually be improved over the next versions, but even I, at the time, as an actual child, felt a genuine sense of loss due to these versions. I actually wanted to go back to 1.7.3, and even when these issues were fixed, others still remained. Onwards from beta 1.7.3, the world generation was changed, and it was just so much less interesting. The world was boring to look at. You would almost never see terrain generation that gave you chills like you get in the so-called Golden Age. And all of this was on top of the issues that the Golden Age also had. Caving was still really boring. You would mostly just strip mine to get resources. The Nether Fortress helped the Nether a bit, but it was still pretty boring. The Silver Age had all the same problems as the Golden Age, with none of its strengths. It is, in my opinion, by a significant margin the worst era of the game. And this actually feeds my argument of why I like modern versions of the game so much. We, of course, got a Nether update, which completely revamped the Nether with entirely new biomes and structures. We got the Caves and Cliffs update, which is, in my opinion, the best update that the game has ever had. The world generation is incredible again. Actually, I prefer this to the Golden Age. Mining might now make you encounter an insane cave. I've literally built castles inside caves because of how insane they can be now, and there's just no point in strip mining because the caves provide you with so many resources. So to summarize this whole video, I do get the appeal of the Golden Age. I really do. It's got a unique and very compelling aesthetic, and it's a true sandbox in a way in which the modern versions are not. But I would also argue it fails to make its primary game loop nearly as interesting as modern Minecraft. If I can do whatever I like, I want to enjoy every single moment of it. If it feels like work to gather resources, as I think it did for much of the game's history, then I'm not going to feel like doing that as much. Of course, I don't think modern Minecraft is perfect. I've mentioned some of the reasons why, notably the fact that it has a definite end. But at being a game which allows you to do whatever you like in a way where you actually enjoy yourself, I would argue the best version of the game is the one we have right now. Alright, that was a different video to my usual ones I've done on this topic. I'm going to start doing these sole opinion type of videos occasionally. I'll do them because they take little to no research and therefore take much less time. They'll help me get more content out in between bigger projects. In other words, don't worry. I'm still making the Shadow of Israel video. It will come out eventually. I hope I didn't ruffle too many feathers with this one. I hope you all enjoyed. Please like and subscribe. Have a good day and goodbye.